Hey, what's going on, guys? Sentex here. So, about a year and a half ago to 2 years ago, I uploaded a two-part series on my YouTube channel on the basics of using Blender to make Unturned mods, specifically weapons. This video is going to be a recap of that, and hopefully a more updated tutorial. And my goal is to just make a more concise video that's easier to watch, easier to understand. And I'm taking into consideration any comments or questions that were posted on my previous videos. So anyways, let's start. Blender is currently on version 3.2, as you can see. I myself am not a fan of any of the future versions, as I never really use them. So I'll show you what I always did. And that is how to revert to an older version of Blender. If you want to do the same, just do as I follow, just follow as I do. So you want to go to your Steam library and right-click Blender. You'll see Properties, hit Betas, and then right here you want to click the down arrow, and I always use 2.79 alpha. Hit that, boom, there you go. You would then want to hit Update. It'll download when it's ready. There we go. It's about to click in. Boom. Perfect. So, once you're ready, launch the game. Perfect. So, after you come here and you click out of that initial screen, one way of how to delete everything is if you press the A key on your keyboard, it selects everything. From here you can either just press X and you can delete like that, or Control Z. You press A and the delete key on your keyboard, same result. Doesn't matter. So now you have yourself a empty grid square, which you can do many things with. What I like to do for Blender modeling is a flat view. So for a flat view, what you want to do is go in your numpad and you want to press numpad 5 and then numpad 3. And that will put you in isometric flat view, as you can see. So now you're basically set up to actually start creating models. So in this case, let's go ahead and get ourselves some basic model. So we're going to go ahead and do a Russian TT-33 pistol. This is not going to be a high detail model, it's just going to be a very basic model. What you're looking for in most images is something that is as flat as possible. So you don't want anything angled like that. That's going to make your job a nightmare. Same with that. Unless you have the software such as Photoshop to rotate an image, because that is actually quite a good image. If you have the software to rotate an image like that to get a perfect 90, go for it. But you don't want any images like this or like that. You want a nice flat view image. In this case, this image here from Firearms Outlet Canada will actually work perfectly. So right click, save image as, we'll go ahead and save it to desktop. Tango Tango 33 project. Doesn't really matter what format you save it in. This is a JPEG, so be it. Save, downloaded, boom. So, next up, now that you have your source image of what you are planning to make, your next step is, if you follow my cursor here, you will see a little tiny square. Click and hold, and you will pull out this little window here. Pull it out as far as you like. I usually leave it about here. It should automatically have you scroll down, and that's where you'll see this little tab of background images. Hit the check mark, the little arrow, add image, scroll down, open file, desktop, Tango Tango 33 project.jpg. Boom, there you go. You're gonna have to scroll out a bit possibly, and that should be it. So, to begin, you want to press the add key down here. So in this case, add, and as you see, you have many different objects you can add. You have things such as speakers, cameras, etc. That is more for video game design and Blender animation. For the purposes of Unturned firearm creation or other object creation, you just want to stick with meshes. So we'll add a cube, boom. And that is your cube right there. You can now shift it up and down. If you would want to shift a object on a very specific plane, what you would have to do is hold Control, and then you can move it only up and down that plane. Doesn't matter if you move left or right. Because otherwise, yes, you can still move it on that plane, but if you were to grab it in the center, for example, now your object is no longer centered. It's now off, as you can see here in the grid coordinates. These are your coordinates, by the way. Remember these coordinates as they are important. There you go. 0, 0, 0, 0. That is now centered. So, you're now currently what's called object mode. What you would like to do to edit this cube, aside from editing in very small ways that you can in object mode, is you would like to press Tab on your keyboard. It should be on the left side of your keyboard. So you press Tab, and now you'll see that your little vertices have popped up and your window has changed. So if you'd like to move your camera, you can scroll in, scroll out. If you want to move up or down, you hold Shift, and move up, and you move down. If you'd like to rotate the image, you simply use your mouse button, you move around. To return, numpad 5, numpad 3. Sometimes you have to press 5, 3, 5, 3 a few times. Eventually you will get your isometric image. So, first off, sizing. To size something, you press S. The further you move your cursor out, the larger the object will be. The further in you move it, the smaller it will be. If you're looking for very specific sizes, like very precise measurements, what you can do, tip I'd recommend, is have your cursor as far away as possible. In this case, it's in the bottom right. Have it as far away as possible, then press S, and now you can scale very small, very slow, as small as you need, rather than if you had it here and you pressed S, you can see that even the slightest movement makes it a lot larger. So, that is how you size things. To rotate, you can just press R, free rotate with your mouse, as you please. If you right click, it will revert it. If you left click, it will save it. Control Z, fix that. If you would like to rotate on a specific axis, in this case, you can see that as we move up, that is our Z axis. You could do R, Z. Now you're rotating this object on Z axis, that being the blue line, as if it was to basically be right through the center. You can also hit R, Y. Now you're rotating on the Y axis, the green line. And now if you want to hit on the other axis, the red line that you can only see when you're in a different view, all you have to do is RX, and you'll be able to rotate it normally. What I recommend in this case is don't bother with the axes unless you're using this kind of view to do very specific details. All you need to really do is just hit R, rotate by hand. If you would like to rotate your object to a very specific degree, such as say you want to do half of 90, so 45, all you have to do is press R and type in exactly the measurement you want. So in this case, 4, 5. Perfect 45 degree angle. So now there's that. Continuing on, there is now a few ways of how you can move this object. As mentioned before, you can either go freehand or you can move by the axes. Highly recommend by the axes. It makes everything a lot more precise. So in this case, that's exactly what we're going to do. If you want more controlled movements, you start moving up. And as you can see, despite me moving my cursor even one solid line, you'll see how it hops around like that. How it's almost like how it's stuttering slightly. That moves it up in perfect increments, because as you see on the top right on my little grid coordinates, on my little grid coordinate legend, you'll see that it's moving it up by increments of 0.1 specifically. So in this case, we will go to height 1.3. It does look lined up, but as you zoom in, you'll see that that is not lined up. So here's a quick tidbit. If you press just Z on your keyboard, you go into what's called skeleton mode. Now, either if you unselect by pressing A, or if you have it selected, you'll be able to see through your object. Here's where the best way I'd say of moving this is have your object deselected. To select a very specific vertice, and or if you select other tools such as edge select or face select, to actually select these sides, you have to press C on your keyboard and you'll see a little circle. Anything within that circle, as you left click, will be highlighted. So for example, I'm currently on vertice select, click, click, or click drag, doesn't matter, and now I'm ready to move. I right click, and now I'm ready to move my object. It is the same effect if you do the line tool, the edge tool. As you can see, I only move that, or the face tool, as I have now selected that face on top there. Anyhow, I would usually recommend sticking with the vertice tool. So in this case, you grab your vertices, zoom in a bit for that precision, boom, perfect, good enough. We'll now do the same. We're going to keep the frame generally one piece, and the grips will be a separate piece. So now that you have these basic tools, I'd recommend shape the gun the way you want it to be. This is not intended to be a high detail model. This is just a very basic step-by-step guide on how to make a model. So now that you're here, you might be wondering, well, how do I actually make something like the pistol grip in this component, in this example? Well, you have a few ways. Option 1, you can duplicate this item by selecting it, hitting Shift D on your keyboard. Don't move your mouse, click, and now you have a duplication, which you can now rotate and basically turn into your pistol grip. I would not recommend this option, as yes, it looks fine here, but when you're texturing, if that is a different color from this, you'll have a lot of interference here, and it will be, well, it won't look the best. So here's what I'd recommend instead. You use a division tool. I know there's a specific name, can't remember off the top of my head, but here's how you use it. You hit Control R. You'll see a pink line. This pink line is where this pink line symbolizes how you can divide this. Depending on the angle you're on, if I do this, you can see that it will divide it this way. If I do it from this angle, you'll see it divide it that way, and this angle will divide it this way. I, in this case, will do it here. You can also modify how many pink lines for division you want by hitting either a number or use the scroll wheel. In this case, what we're going to do is click, shift the line over to where I want it. In this case, it will be right over here, as we will not be including a trigger guard. And there you go. So now what you can do here is you still need to make the pistol grip, but as you can see, you now have two different faces. What you can do is press C again, select these faces, and now you can hit E to extrude. If you press E, it will automatically shift it down, and you pull it down to exactly where you want it to be. There you go. Perfect. We're getting a rough shape. It doesn't look like much, but it will be turned into something much better. From here on, it's a matter of using the division tool as much as you can. So I'll make another division right here. I will select this point here, division right there. There you go. Now we have a curve on the back receiver. And now you can continue to replicate this as you go. Make your small adjustments. So in this case, we don't want any massive curves, nothing too high poly and or realistic. So we're going to do some very rough curves. Curves that can be adjusted later on and made to look a lot smoother than they really are. There you go. Okay, another tool. Another tool you can use in certain things, such as making a curve, is instead of doing a subdivision, such as here, and then proceeding to do that, there is another tool you can use that will generate a lot less faces. While this can work, it generates extra faces, and any extra faces will make texturing not only harder, but could potentially be more harmful to the game, depending on how many extra faces you're adding. So what you can do here instead is, if you select this specific corner, or the line, what you can do is hit Control B, the bevel tool. As you move out, you will see that this will create a bevel. A bevel is basically an extra face being generated out of that. So you can hit that here. You don't also have to keep it at one face. You can use the scroll wheel to add as many faces, or you can use, well, yeah, I guess you can only use the scroll wheel, but yeah. For example, there you go. That is now a much better bevel. It only generated one face, whereas before it generated an extra 6 faces, if I'm not mistaken. Here, we can now rotate this, lift it up, good enough. And now you continue on with this process. This is mostly straight. This can go down to about here, where the curve begins. And our last piece can stay right there. You can see that you now have a pistol. Problem is that, as you notice, though the details are coming along, the general frame of the firearm itself is rather thick, so to speak. So, one way to fix this. There's quite a few ways to fix this, but the easiest I would recommend is this. If you select the object, the whole object, by pressing A, or by doing the face select tool, going into skeleton view, and then selecting only the sides that are on both sides, but not the whole gun itself, such as like this, or as I mentioned before, by pressing A, which is easier, you can then go into a side view by pressing 4 or 6 multiple times on your numpad to rotate it by perfect increments. And from here on, you can then size it to scale. As mentioned before, with sizing your objects to whatever size you need, all you need to do is press S. In this case, using the tip I recommended earlier, I'll have my cursor out further for more precise measurements. So I can now press S, and yes, you'll see that the whole gun becomes smaller. But instead, what I can do is SX. This means if by pressing S and then the X key, it will only shrink it or size it in the X axis. That means instead of shrinking the whole gun, I can now move it and it will only reduce the thickness. The Tokarev itself is a rather thin pistol, so in this case, right around there. That should do. There you go. Now, the majority of the firearm in this case is mostly complete if you're just trying to make a very low polymer pistol for Unturned. Even this is a lot higher of a poly compared to most vanilla guns. So, what can we do now? Well, now we can look at some of the finer details. In this case, based on that Tokarev, you can see that line that runs across the pistol. That's where the curvature of the pistol starts. So we can use the subdivide tool right there. And select the vertices. We will grab the height off of that, which is the Z. Click Control C. Now what we can do is select that point and overpaste that. And now that is in line with that point. So now we can move that to about here. And instead, just making sure we don't aim it too far to avoid anything like that happening, we can form the curvature of the weapon and it'll still be the rough shape. So now here's what we can do. We can now grab the top of our weapon, all the vertices, and now we can press SX. And you can see it will create a curve, so to speak. In this case, another option is the bevel tool again. So in this case, I'd actually recommend the bevel tool as it will make the job a bit nicer and easier. So in this case, Control B. We'll do 2 points. There you go. That is looking much, much better. So, now that that is done, we have a few other options we can do. We will not be doing some of the finer details like the curvature here, as that is not really too appropriate in this case for this model. So, the barrel. To add something like a barrel, I'd highly recommend a cylinder. Pistols require a square barrel to work, from what I know in Unturned. For Unturned style, as you can see that this is too high poly. This cylinder by default has 32 vertices. I'd recommend a maximum of 6 to 8. So you can press here over the 32, 6, enter. You now have a hexagon. Using the previous tool, we can now rotate 90 degrees, press S to scale to our rough size that we would like, move it up, move it left, and then move to fit, and that looks about right. As this is a pistol, we must now add a cube for it to function in Unturned. I'd highly recommend it if you want this to be the same level. Select that face, copy the height, and now select this cube. Another fun fact, if you're hovering over something with, for example, face select, or if you're hovering over a edge with edge select, or vertice with vertice select, if you simply press L, it will select that object. Now, we can go to the Z, paste our coordinates, and it is now the perfect height. Press S, scale down to much smaller than that barrel. Perfect. Leave it inside the barrel so that way it is not visible on the outside. Apologies. Next up, the sights. So there's a few ways of how we can do this. We can do the subdivision tool and basically make a small face there that we can then press E to extrude on to shift it upwards, or we can put in its own sets of sights in case you want to detach the sights by making them a modification. In my case, I will simply just use the subdivision tool, though yes, this does generate extra faces. That's okay. Now, that is rather thick for a front sight. So here's what we can do. If you press E, you will automatically extrude. Now you can press S and start to scale that exact face, as you can see. But we only want to get it thinner because it's already the perfect length. So by pressing X, you can now only shift it that way, which that is about perfect thickness for a sight. You can now press E again. It will extrude upwards, adjust to height, and then play with it till you feel happy with your outcome. That looks pretty good. Rear sight. You can apply just about the same principle, which is exactly what we shall now do. So, there's our first, and now there's our second subdivision. The rear sight can stay this way, as that is about thick enough. If you also would like to adjust afterwards, because you still believe your sight may or may not be a bit too thick, you could simply select both of these faces and still press SX and shift it in. So that's a bit better. So, moving back, you can now select the face we made here. Also, if you select the side by accident that you don't want, or a line or a vertice, say here, if you want to deselect it, while you're in select mode, you press middle mouse button and it will deselect. Anyhow. So now we can do the same strategy of pressing E, and it will extrude perfectly. Is it a bit thick? Probably, but in this case, so be it. If you want to, you can also double extrude. So you can press E, click that, just click without moving your mouse, and then press E again. That way, if for some reason you want to play around with your weapon afterwards, for example with the sight, you can just select the side, and boom, there you go. Now that way it doesn't mess up your gun. Perfect. I recommend double extruding, as it is quite a useful tip and feature. So, you now have the rough sights, but as you can see, you clearly can't see through them. So, firstly, one recommendation, you're currently looking at the front sight post, select the highest most point, Control C on that, and now Control paste over. Yes, that does not necessarily correspond with the image, but it will function better in game. So now you need to make sights. The rear sight, you have a few options here. You can use the subdivide tool, but as you can see it makes rather weird faces, or you could do option 2, which is to learn a new technique. This technique is called boolean. So in this case, here's what we shall do, and you can do this with any shape. We're going to put in a cube. Now, knowing all well that there are other methods of rotation, here's what we shall do. We will now press R to rotate, Y to rotate on the Y-axis, that's the green, and hit 45. There you go. You now have basically a diamond. So, what we will do, you could also scale it down to make it easier to work with, is now you can shift it upwards, adjust it to exactly where you want it to be. So in this case, as it is still centered, I can now move this down and have it cut out basically exactly whatever's in orange, and that's exactly what I'll see. Perfect. So now how do we get rid of that little chunk? You want to press spacebar, and you will see this little window pop up wherever your cursor is. You want to type in boo, you'll see intersect boolean. When you click this, it will automatically take out a little chunk like that. As you can see, now these front sights are usable. Perfect. Your gun is almost complete. Now we can work on adding the finer details. Most of the tools that are from here on will be tools that I've already displayed earlier, but as this is not a very precise unturned weapon, you will just see that I'll be applying the same tools, no other techniques, and just completing some of the finer details of this weapon. So, it's going to be your rough hammer. Not the best hammer, but that's okay. That'll do the trick. This is not meant to be a precise weapon. Now, despite me saying earlier that we will not be doing the trigger guard, something is eating at me, so be it. So, to make a trigger guard, we will do the same thing we did for the sights, because we cannot set it like that, because that is too thick. So, what we will do is press E, then S, X. Size it to wherever we would feel comfortable. Right there should be good. We'll press E again. As you can see, it works, but it's a bit too thick. So you'll press S, Y. So that way we only shift it that way. That's the way it's still the same thickness. Select that. E, move it down. And you could either do a straight 90-degree angle that goes there, or option 2, move it to wherever you see a curve point starting. And now you can press R, rotate, shift it over, E, and keep repeating this process. Shift it over, E, rotate, rotate, so it's about lined up, shift it over, and then perfect. There you go. That's your trigger guard. As for your actual trigger, we're going to get a bit lazy here and do a bit of a cheat. We will be doing the same technique of extruding, so we press E, S, X. Simply move that up like that. And as you can see, because this side is already it's already entering the gun, it won't be visible. There will be no space in the back. And now all we have to do is press E, move the weapon up, and there's your trigger. We will of course shape it. So we will use the subdivide tool, make 2 lines, shift it to about there, and now we can use the vertice select tool. So we're going to go ahead and shift that over here. Maybe we're about there. Boom. Boom. Maybe we're going to add another vertice. So make this a bit more precise. Make it look like more of a curve. And that's about the curve point. So now we can move this back. Doesn't matter how this looks. So that's all you see right there. Perfect. That's about a Tokarev trigger. This is starting to look much, much better. Now, some of the finer details. We will now be adding a grip panel, which we will be making a separate piece, but it's still in the same object. Not a different object, as you can see. So, we will shift it to about here. We will press S, Z, stretch it to about what we believe it to be. That height lines up. Now, we will grab these specific vertices, line up using the image to the rough curvature. Perfect. Now we can rotate this image, and you can now press S, X, make it a bit thicker than the gun, but not by a lot, as it is only a minor fine detail. Shift it over right to where you want it to be. This is going outside a bit, so we will shift this up, in, and that looks pretty good. Yes, this is a curve. We're going to go ahead and press Control B. Boom. That is minor, so we will not include that. So are these curves at the bottom. There is a sling point there, but we'll not be including it. Other details we can add is this pin right here, which I believe is either the mag release or the safety. Probably the mag release. Anyhow, so what we can do here is add a cylinder. R, Y, so you rotate it on the Y axis, 90, enter, press S, shift it over, line it up to wherever you'd like to put it, line it up again, but now it's inside the gun, so now we press SX and simply pull until it pops out, just so it extrudes a little amount. There you go. And now we can also add this little slide stop or slide catch. So what we can do here is, considering that this pin is roughly the same size on the other side, we can now press Shift D, not moving our mouse, just hit left click. It now duplicates the item. Put this to where we'd exactly expect it. And now what we can do is, considering we'll only show up on the other side for the pin, so the safety is one-sided, we can move that in. And now on this side, we can simply add in a false detail, such as a cube, to about the same size. There we go. Okay. Shift that over here. This shifts up a bit, so now we can press S, Z, boom. As for these sides, here's what we can do. Just for a bit of detail, we will simply use the bevel tool, add one little side, push that out. Perfect. Now, as for this, we will use the subdivide tool, if I can reach that. No? Okay. Oh, that's why. Okay. Now we also need to make sure that this is outside of the gun, not the inside. So we'll simply select it and move it out to about there. Perfect. Now there's a few things you could do. We're not going to add the little actual nub detail, but that's okay. And there you go. That's basically a Tokarev right there. So this is the basic tutorial of how to actually create a model. If for some reason after watching this video you feel like there's anything else that you think I missed or you'd like me to explain, please feel free. The last thing we can actually potentially add to this model is simply a magazine. So the magazine needs to be a separate object. So you shouldn't be able to see any vertices, faces, or edges. So we will press Tab. So it says Object Mode. And in that case, we will then add a mesh, a cube. So we will simply shift this cube over, make it roughly mag sized, move it up. In this case, that should do. And now go into edit mode, and simply, just as with the magazine, shift it up, which should be really realistically about there. And now we could just simply shift it like that. This will be inside the gun. It will not be visible. We can now select the whole magazine, S, X, shift it till it's basically inside the gun. It's a single stack 7.62 by 24 magazine, full caliber and caliber weapons, so it's a rather small, thin magazine for a rather small, thin pistol. But as you can see, the model's looking pretty good. Not bad for something that's very low to mid detail. So what's left? You have your magazine, that's a separate object. You have your pistol, that's a separate object. From here on, you could leave it be, send the texturing to someone else, or you could texture it yourself. And that's exactly what I'm going to teach you how to do. So for this, I'd highly recommend you have a software such as Photoshop. If not, you could simply work this around in MS Paint. However, for unturned weapons, I believe the minimum size texture you need is 8 pixels. That is a 2x4 size template for your colors. The higher pixel count you have, the more storage it will take for your mod, which means it may or may not cause more problems, lag on a server. This is why I highly recommend Adobe Photoshop. So in this case, I open Photoshop. And from here on, what we can do is go to File, New. This is, of course, if you're only using Photoshop. Set the width as 4, height as 2. Perfect. There you go. What we can now do is go back to our reference image, and we can look at the image of the Tokarev, in which case the pistol grip is black, the gun itself is a gunmetal blue finish. So, and the pin is silver. So that's exactly what we're going to try to set up. Here, we'll go for the metallic black, till about you feel comfortable, about there. And we will go ahead and use the pencil tool, and there you go. We can now go ahead and do the more metallic blue. Let's make that a bit darker. There. And for the pin and the magazine as well, there you go. So what you want to now do is click File, Save As. We'll save it to our desktop, and you want to save this under PNG. So we will call this Tango Tango 33 TXT. Do not put a dot beside the TXT, like right here, as that will form a different type of file. There you go. It's now saved. So now, the final processes of this firearm. What you want to do for texturing is, you'll see up here this little tab. Hit it, and where it says Blender Render, you want to set it to Cycles Render. This will put your whole object as a Cycles Render object. So now, as you can see, it doesn't matter what I click, whether I click the magazine or the gun, it's now in Cycles Render. So, texturing. You'll need to do this for every individual item. You can't just press A, as that will mess up your textures. It will select all your items, but it will not apply the textures to everything. So select your individual item, go over to your right, and here you'll see a little mesh circle. Press it, hit New, and here, right here where it says Color, the little gray square to the right side, Image Texture. Open your file, go to Desktop, and open that. Also, where it says linear, is there anything else here that I needed to change? Okay, we'll get back to that afterwards. That doesn't matter. Now we're going to go ahead and do that for a magazine. Same process. There you go. So now you have the texture. If you were to go into render mode, which as you can see here, you have your different rendering modes. If you go into rendered mode, the pistol is black. So to change the environment, you go here, hit the color, scroll all the way up. You can see that it's just black compared to before where it would be white. This doesn't help, though it is progress. So what you want to do is go back to solid view. Right here, top window, it will say default. Hit the little arrow key and switch over to compositing. We'll get 3 windows. Grab this side, put that all the way up. You only need these 2 windows. So, in the bottom left hand corner, you'll see your image, and you'll see a file that says open. Hit open, go to wherever you saved your file, in this case my desktop, open up your file. Very small, you'll have to scroll in. Perfect. So, now comes the final part, the texturing part. So we'll start out with the magazine. You can't just put the magazine in. We will be doing something called Smart UV. Smart UV works by basically creating a map, like it creates a grid of the shape, a 3D model, as if you were to put it on a piece of paper and have to fold it together. So what we have to do is press space and now type in Smart. I'll say Smart UV project. Hit OK, and now you see that. As you select or deselect your object, or if you only select the face, only that will show up. In our case, we want to do this. Select the whole object. While on this side, press A to select everything, or if you're specifically texturing a certain colors, select whatever faces you want to be that specific color. Press S, scale it down, as it is less conflicting. Now to move it, you press G, and you move it to where you want it to be. Doesn't matter as long as it's in the color area you want. So now we repeat the same process here. Smart UV project, boom. As I hit tab to enter edit mode and press A, you'll see the whole gun show up. So for simplicity's sake, we will start off by putting the whole gun in the gunmetallic blue finish, and then we will do the finer details. So in this case, the pistol grip can be moved to the black, and the barrel, actually we'll do the barrel black instead. So we can now go ahead and select the finer details, such as the, Control Z. Oh right, I can't do that, okay. Such as the hammer, in this case right here, the barrel, the slide stop, and the pin here in the back. We can now select those finer details, press A, G, shift it over to black. Now your gun should be fully ready to render. So go back to default, use this as your rendering view. Now hit rendered, boom, your gun is now textured. Doesn't look the best, as maybe I might have messed up the color scheme, but the point is there nonetheless. So there you guys have it. Now you have a textured gun that you can texture any way, any sort of shape, way you want. You can do quite a lot of interesting textures and techniques. If you see here, you'll see that your front sights are usable. And honestly, for a quick project, not bad. Not the best model, not the worst, but that's more than passable for Unturned standards. When you get out, you can also hit material. It will also show in a much less laggy, less stress-inducing for your PC's performance view. And then you can go back to solid. For some reason, sometimes there is a weird glitch where your textures will merge together, and despite you coloring everything correctly, it won't work. If that's the case, which is hard to explain, but your colors are all messed up or they merge into one color, what you have to sometimes do is when you're here on linear, hit linear, switch it to closest, and that should fix it. Going back into rendered, it's the same thing, as that was not an issue in this case, but if you do end up with that issue, that is a quick fix. Anyhow, I hope this tutorial was more in depth about the basics of creating a gun. As soon as I relearn Unity, I will be going over the basic steps of how to size, export, and then set up and rig a gun in Unity. And then afterwards, how to do the text files in how to do the text files I will put into the game. Actually, now that I remembered, quick last thing. So now that you know that it's low poly, there is a way to actually make certain things more smooth. Quick little tip that some people don't like to do, but some do, like myself. For anything that's circular, you want to select the size that you want to be circular. In this case, the barrel. Front sight can... Okay, I'll do the front sight as well. Whoops. Just the front sight. The whole bottom trigger guard. Okay, the pins can stay the way they are. And then the backstrap portion. And you know what? We'll even do the whole top portion of the weapon. Anywhere that basically has any curves, which is the whole top portion. Just deselect that. There we go. Just gonna do that even though it doesn't have to be. Perfect. So now if you want to make anything more circular, so to speak, and appear smoother, here's what you can do. You have all your sides selected. You hit shading UVs here on the left. Faces, hit them as smooth. You'll see that it smoothens your gun out a lot. When it comes to rendering, it makes your gun look a lot less blocky. Everything's a lot smoother. You can't see the edges as much. Same for the barrel. But it really shows up in other views, such as solid. This makes it so your gun doesn't look as blocky in Unturned, and it's just generally a lot nicer to look at. Anyhow, guys, as I was saying before, that should be the full tutorial here. If you watched here till the end, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider leaving a like, sharing, and or subscribing. If you believe there's something I might have missed in this tutorial, please feel free to comment it below and I'll make sure to adjust it and upload a secondary video if there's anything you'd like to learn that's within my grasp. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Centex out.